Latina en Israel, News 24, únicamente en I24 News.
This is I24 News. First, our headlines. In a limited operation, IDF has taken over parts of the Gaza-Egypt border. Another day of intense bombardments from Hezbollah on northern Israel. And hostage negotiations are stuck again, but may continue. So, hostage negotiations will presumably resume in Cairo as the IDF is engaging in a limited operation and has taken over part of the Gaza-Egypt border. I24 News' Adam Burnitz has the latest.
Rafah on edge. Day 214 of Israel at war. The IDF carried out targeted airstrikes in the Rafah area overnight, and tanks entered the Palestinian side of the border crossing with Egypt on Tuesday morning.
Last night, I ordered, with the approval of the War Cabinet, an operation in Rafah. Within hours, our forces raised the Israeli flag at the Rafah crossing and took down the Hamas flag. The entry into Rafah serves two main war goals: the return of our hostages and the elimination of Hamas.
Yesterday, I ordered the IDF to enter Rafah and seize the crossing to carry out its tasks. This operation will continue until we eliminate Hamas in the Rafah area and the entire Gaza Strip, or until the first abductee returns. And it will happen all over the Strip, in the south, in the center, and in the north. We know that Hamas only understands force.
Israeli military vehicles were spotted along the Egypt-Gaza border in the eastern part of Rafah. The 401st Armored Brigade spearheading the capture of the Rafah crossing Tuesday morning, following an extensive wave of attacks on Rafah overnight. The capture of Salah ad-Din Road in eastern Rafah is a strategic development which further solidifies the IDF's operational control over the Rafah crossing, Gaza's only outlet to the Arab world. The United States and international powers have maintained a harsh stance against Israel launching a ground operation in Rafah. Led by the US, they have voiced major concerns about how displaced Gazans sheltering there will fare in any Israeli operation.
I want to take a moment to address the latest reports now out of Rafah, which was also a topic of discussion on the call. I'll reiterate again that we cannot and we will not speak for IDF operations, but we've made clear our views about operations in Rafah that could potentially put more than 1 million innocent people at greater risk.
The IDF's limited scope operation began at midnight and saw airstrikes targeting over 50 Hamas sites in the area. According to IDF reports, these strikes resulted in the elimination of at least 20 Hamas militants. The Israeli army bombed 50 targets and found 3 large tunnels during overnight Rafah crossing operations. In the aftermath, Gazans expressed anger as they rummaged through the rubble.
We don't say, except that I swear to God, we're patient and we will remain steadfast on this land, God willing. We are waiting for liberation, and this battle will be for liberation, God willing. We will be a malaise to the enemy. This is God's promise to us, and God will not break his promise.
On Monday, the IDF had ordered the evacuation of around 100,000 Palestinian civilians in Rafah, out of over 1 million, as it moved toward a limited initial invasion of the last remaining Hamas stronghold in the enclave. Israeli Foreign Minister Katz said the entry of the IDF into Rafah promoted the 2 main goals of the war, the release of the hostages and the defeat of Hamas. Hamas is claimed to have somewhere between 4,000 and 8,000 fighters left, including at least 4 battalions in Rafah, out of the around 35,000 terrorists that it had prior to the war starting on October 7th. The terror group insinuated that any future battles in Rafah will not be easy for the IDF. Meanwhile, the fate of the Israeli hostages held by Hamas hangs in the balance.
And I-24 News' Nicole Tzedek is near the Israel-Gaza border. Nicole, with the latest from there.
Yes, good afternoon. The latest from here is that as the IDF does continue with this limited operation inside the eastern neighborhood of Rafah, Hamas and other terror groups, they continue to fire and engage in those battles while also firing towards southern Israeli communities. Within the last hour, the IDF says a barrage of 12 rockets were fired into the areas near Kisufim and Reim in southern Israel. 5 of them were intercepted. We saw those interceptions overhead, and the other 7 fell in open areas, according to the IDF. So as the IDF is continuing to engage with these Hamas fighters, they're going to continue to use the weapons and the projectiles that they have stowed away in the Rafah area. As our correspondent Adam so detailed in that detailed report, that the remaining Hamas battalions that the IDF says is in Rafah right now, we're talking about 4 pretty much untouched Hamas battalions. And so the reason that Israel says they're going forward with this limited in scope operation for now is to try and put pressure on Hamas to agree to some sort of a hostage release deal that is currently being negotiated in Cairo. But if a deal is not on the table, and if Hamas does not want to agree to a deal and release the hostages, which so far they have yet to do, then the IDF says they're going to continue to go forward, putting more and more military pressure, and not just in Rafah, continuing with these military operations all throughout the Gaza Strip. And they say they will go deeper and conduct even more intense operations if need be in the near future.
All right, Nicole, thank you very much. Here in the studio are Yaakov Lapin, a military affairs analyst, and Dr. Michael Oren, former Israeli ambassador to Washington. Thank you very much for coming, both of you. Let's start with you, Yaakov. What is the military goal here in this operation in Rafah?
So there are multiple goals here. First of all, Rafah is a strategic crossing, and the fact that now the IDF controls it means that this will negatively impact Hamas's ability to smuggle weapons, to smuggle personnel back and forth between Sinai, as they've been doing all these years. Second of all, there is a pressure lever now that's being applied to Hamas. The Hamas leadership sees that the IDF is coming at it from multiple directions. They feel that they're being closed in on. And that is going to increase Israel's leverage in negotiations. That will improve Israel's ability to negotiate, because now time is not working for Hamas anymore. Now time is working for Israel, because the more that Hamas plays for time and stalls, as it has been doing for months, the longer this operation will last, and the more damage Hamas's last stronghold will incur. So when you put all these things together, we have both military objectives that are being met here and the potential for political objectives.
And what are the other goals?
Yes. So far, it seems to me, Yaakov, that Israel is trying not to have a head-on collision with the Biden administration. The Biden administration says we'll allow surgical strikes into Rafah. We're not going to support an all-out invasion. They've said it again and again, most recently in a conversation between President Biden and Benjamin Netanyahu last night. So far, what the IDF has done has not gone into central Rafah. It's sort of nibbled around the edges. They're taking over the Rafah crossing and trying to avoid as much as possible this head-on collision. But there are other factors at play. The UN, the World Health Organization, says that the northern part of the Gaza Strip is on the verge of a widespread famine. I was in Washington not too long ago. I heard the same thing from the White House. And what happened the other day with Hamas shelling the Keren Shalom crossing, where most of that aid goes in, and they shelled it again today, is they're forcing the closing of that crossing. And when that crossing closes, it increases the chances of famine and widespread humanitarian disaster throughout Gaza Strip, which in turn increases international pressure on Israel to accept a ceasefire. It's very, very clever, because people are going to forget why that was closed.
Clever on the part of Hamas.
Yes, very clever on the part of Hamas. They're going to forget that Israeli soldiers were killed. They're going to say just Israel closed the crossing. And in fact, the Biden administration asked Israel to reopen the crossing today, even though while shells were falling. So you see, get an idea. So Hamas is not done yet, and they're very smart. And now they've tabled their own counter proposal, which is far less than what Israel bargained for. Of course, it calls for an open-ended ceasefire that will result in Hamas's emergence from the tunnels and regain its control over the Gaza Strip under some type of international umbrella. It's very interesting, very clever again. The proposal apparently given to the Egyptians and the Qataris. There's some rumor that the Americans knew about it and didn't tell Israel about it. Israel's going to reject it. So now Hamas looks like it's being very generous.
We'll speak in length about the hostage deal, but let me bring in from Cairo, Hossein Kamal Kharidi, former assistant to Egyptian foreign minister. Thank you very much for joining us.
My pleasure.
To what extent are Egypt and Israel coordinated on what's happening now in the Rafah area?
I'm not sure that there has been any kind of coordination between Egypt and Israel. I doubt very much if the Egyptian government would even think of coordinating with the Israelis for the scene that we have seen this morning, Israel hosting the Israeli flag on the Palestinian side of the Rafah crossing. Egypt, when speaking about the post-war Gaza, has always called for a Palestinian administration to administer and to administer this Gaza Strip. So I doubt very much, sir, that there was any coordination. Maybe the Israeli government or the Israeli military in the last few days has alerted the Egyptian military that it would launch what the Israelis have called a limited military operation in Rafah. Maybe, I say maybe, but that does not amount to coordination in the strict sense of the term.
All right.
On the other hand, I guess what's going on in Rafah these days is very alarming, is very dangerous, and it could carry consequences on Egyptian-Israeli relations. It all depends on how long the Israeli army would be stationed along the Egyptian border. And it remains to be seen. Let's wait and see how this operation would develop. And I don't think it's to call it a limited military operation is the right word for it. It has a major strategic significance for the medium and long term as far as Gaza is concerned.
What would be the red line for Egypt regarding Rafah?
The true Israeli intentions behind this operation are uncertain. At the present moment, here in Egypt, we are waiting for future developments and see what is going to happen in Rafah. The main question is how long the Israeli troops would stay in Rafah, and how long will the Israelis control the Palestinian side of the Rafah crossing. These are two main questions, and we are waiting. I guess we would wait and see how the Israelis would deal with the reality on the ground.
Mm-hmm. It's reported now that an Israeli delegation has left for Cairo for more negotiations on the hostage deal. Is there still a chance for one, do you think?
We hope so. We hope so. Really, we don't see how this operation or how the perpetuation of the Israeli war against Gaza would help in achieving the objectives that the Israeli government has announced. You referred that the Israeli government said that the reasons behind the limited operation in Rafah is the release of hostages and to destroy 4 Hamas battalions in Rafah. We are not sure that that would take place. On the contrary, we are really concerned. We are really concerned on purely humanitarian grounds of the fate of the remaining hostages. And today, we were alarmed by a statement attributed to a Hamas leader saying that the Israeli limited military operation in Rafah has put the lives of the hostages at risk. And we are really alarmed by the statement. And that's why you are really worried about the fate of those innocent hostages that we would like. And that's one of the reasons why in Egypt, we want this ceasefire agreement to be sealed as quickly as possible, so that would be the release of the hostages, as well as a sustainable calm or a sustainable ceasefire in Gaza for a long period of time, for the benefit of the Israelis and for the benefit of the Palestinians.
Mr. Hossein Kamel Khalidi, I thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Back to the studio here, Yaakov. Clearly, Israel doesn't want to pull the string too much when it comes to relationships with Cairo. How is this being played?
First of all, I don't take anything that Cairo is saying officially at face value. I just don't, because I think that they're walking down this fine line between, on the one hand, Hamas is the enemy of the Egyptian government. It's the branch of the Muslim Brotherhood, which is a domestic foe, which they have to spend years fighting, which threatens their stability. And, when it comes to military operations against terrorists, they have no qualms about, launching a major military operation that goes on for years against ISIS in Sinai. So, the position from Cairo seems a little bit hypocritical to me, and they have to worry about their domestic opinion. Having said all of that, there's no question that Israel has to coordinate with Egypt. I believe that is actually happening behind closed doors with the help of the United States, with the help of the CENTCOM probably, and military officials. I'm sure that there is going to be quiet coordination behind closed doors, and I actually think that Egypt would much rather see, at least for now, Israel on this side of the Rafah border than Hamas, which, as I've said, is a branch of their most sworn domestic foe within Egypt. These are not convenient facts for the Egyptian government, but they are facts nonetheless.
Right. Ambassador Oren, the peace agreement with Egypt is most important to Israel.
Crucial. It's a cornerstone. I don't think it's in danger. Note what Israel's not doing. Right? Israel's not demanding that Egypt open its borders to these refugees. It'd be the most obvious thing. There was an interesting article in the Wall Street Journal the other day attacking President Biden for putting all the onus on Israel and not making any pressure on Egypt, and where all of these refugees could just go down the road 100 yards and being safe and be out of Gaza, even in a temporary encampment. Nobody has talked about that in Washington. But even more interesting from my perspective is that no one's talked about it here. No one's saying to the Egyptians, hey, why don't you let these refugees in? So it all falls easy.
We've been talking to Egyptians on this program and elsewhere. They go ballistic when they hear about it.
They can't stomach it. And yet Sinai's empty. It'd be the easiest thing in the world to do. They're afraid. As Yaakov said, their big enemy is the Muslim Brotherhood. Muslim Brotherhood is sort of the parent organization of Hamas. They don't want it there. I think it goes very deep into the Egyptian worldview. Back in 1979, Menachem Begin offered to give Gaza back to Sadat, and Sadat said, don't want it.
Yeah.
Your problem.
Yeah, it's probably not different today.
It's not. I think it really is that Egypt would much rather Israel continues to deal with this bone that's stuck in our throat called the Gaza Strip, and they want as little to do with it as possible.
Such a small place, and nobody can deal with it. But that's a different issue. Now we'll go back to the hostage issue. I-24 News' Valer Sladin is with the hostage families in Tel Aviv. There have been demonstrations actually non-stop recently, Valer.
Yes, exactly. And also today an announcement from the families of the hostages, or at least some of the families of the hostages here behind me in front of the Kiryat, the IDF headquarters here in central Tel Aviv. They are telling the government that if bringing their loved ones means the end of the war on Hamas's demands, then this is what the government should be doing. Of course, this is something that Israel has to cope with and think about. Since the beginning of October 7th, we know that Israel is not giving up on the aim of destroying Hamas and will not actually accept to end the war right now if that was one of the goals. And continuing the discussion that you were having with the Egyptian official that you were talking to regarding the danger that the hostages are facing right now because of the situation in Rafah. A couple of hours ago, the Hamas's military wing, Izzeddin al-Qassam, is announcing and also publishing a video saying that Judith Weinstein were killed or actually injured in an Israeli strike, and later on was killed as a result of the lack or the damage that was caused to the health system in Gaza. Now in Israel, they know that since December actually that Judith was unfortunately killed back in October 7th, and this means that Hamas knows that Israelis, or at least to put pressure on the families of the hostages and their supporters, that this operation will endanger the hostages. But on the other hand, they are not willing actually to lose more hostages that are alive, because they know that this is an asset for them and this is their only card actually out of this situation or out of this war. So we see that the two parties are actually right now in Cairo to discuss the latest on the hostage deal, but the sources in Israel are saying that the mandate that the delegation has right now is maybe to try to check if Hamas demanding any guarantees since phase one. We know that this deal is 3 phases, so whether Hamas is demanding the guarantee of ending the war since the first phase of that war, or can Israel actually go into this deal, finish the first phase, bring out 33 hostages, hopefully all of them alive, and then later on resume this war and continue with the second goal of the war, which is eliminating Hamas. So this is what we're getting right now, the latest about this hostage deal right here in Hostage Square.
Right. Balir, thank you very much for that. Our hearts with the families of hostages, of course. They have been going through hell, no doubt about that. To the question of the negotiations, Ambassador Warren, what are the differences, as you see it, between the Hamas reply and the Israeli rejection?
Okay, first is the number of hostages. Okay, Israel had gone down from 40 to 33 on the assumption that there were only 33 hostages that fit the criteria of age and disability, gender. That was considered extraordinarily generous by, according to Secretary of State Anthony Blinken, a 40-day ceasefire, release of a great number of Palestinian prisoners from Israeli jails, many of them with so-called blood on their hands, Palestinians who actually killed Israelis. And that was considered a good deal, with one exception from Hamas's or America's perspective. It enabled the government, particularly Prime Minister Netanyahu, to say that the war won't be over. After 40 days, we're going to renew the war. But maybe there was a little bit of an understanding there implicitly that there could be another ceasefire in return for subsequent waves of hostage releases. Along comes Hamas. First, it rejects that, comes back 2 days later and says, here's our deal. We're going to release a certain number of hostages on the first wave. There's going to be a prolonged ceasefire. The second wave will be another ceasefire. Eventually, there will be a permanent ceasefire. All the hostages will be released, permanent ceasefire under international trusteeship. Get this? And what does that mean? International trusteeship will provide an umbrella, camouflage, for Hamas to emerge from its tunnels, to rearm, regroup, and reconquer the Gaza Strip and use it once again to attack Israel.
And I want to ask you, Yaakov, why make it so complicated? Who has the interest to make it so complicated and go on forever and rediscuss every detail once and again?
I think the answer is Hamas, and it's not that complicated. At the end of the day, what Hamas wants is an end to the war. That's why they're holding the hostages, so that they can survive this war and then, as was just said, retake Gaza, rebuild their terror army. That's the bottom line. That's the most important clause. That's the clause that they've been sticking to, and everything else, in my view, is actually details. Everything else can be compromised on by both sides. These are not the main sticking points. How many prisoners, how many days? It's not really about that. I don't think it is. I think it's about whether Hamas will get its way and use the hostages to survive and rebuild its jihadist army. That's what they want to do, or not. And now that Israel is in Rafah, it's beginning to operate. It's also stripping away 100,000 people in eastern Rafah Rafah, that's stripping away Hamas's human shields. It's not a coincidence that suddenly Hamas comes back with a counteroffer when it senses the tanks are starting to move in on it. It senses that the IDF is starting to close in. That's when they suddenly, by miracle or not, suddenly have the initiative for a counteroffer. That shows that they're feeling the pressure, and there's no other way. There's no other way to get leverage on these brutal terrorist leaders except to leverage this kind of pressure, as far as I understand.
Is there an interest, political interest, on behalf of Israeli Prime Minister also to make it complicated?
I don't think so. I think he's in a very inevitable position because he's under tremendous pressure. On one hand, from the hostage families and people who support the hostage families to cut just about any deal. And there were even voices today that Israel saying that the Prime Minister should accept the Hamas deal. Saying, okay, we lost the war. There are people who will say we lost the war on October 7th. And all this carrying on the war is completely unnecessary. Just do whatever whatever Hamas asked, just to get the hostages back. That's Israel's primary and really sole goal. On the other hand, he's under pressure from people within his government, particularly the radical right-wingers. It's from the Smotriches and the Ben-Gvirs to say, go into Rafah and let's put the hostage release at a much lower level. And then there's the United States saying you can't go into Rafah at all, and therefore you can't have any leverage over Hamas. So he's trying to thread any number of needles. I hear this very often. He's trying to drag this out. I don't see him trying to drag it out. I think him trying to sort of maneuver around all these obstacles to reach some type of conclusion. I think if he had his druthers, as we say in America, and I don't think only the Americans will understand that, if he had his preference, he would have cut the first deal for a limited ceasefire in return for 33 hostages, would have gotten peace with Saudi Arabia, would have gotten an international force to come into Gaza and take the keys from Israel, and he would have gotten some type of regional defense architecture against Iran. And then he would have gone to elections and on the way stopped off in Oslo to get a Nobel Peace Prize.
Oh, well,
okay.
That's a grand plan.
It was a grand plan.
But at the same time, Netanyahu keeps stating things like last Saturday, which made a lot of noise in Israel, during the negotiations, in a very sensitive part of negotiations. Yeah. Things like, we're going to go to Rafah anyway, things like, we're not going to give up, we're not going to end the war, and so on. And many people inside Israel see this as an effort not to go forward.
Look, I was listening very carefully to Biden administration officials, and they were saying as recently as last week that the offer that Israel signed off on, this third offer, is the most generous they've seen. It's extraordinary. That's how they described it. And they're not exactly fans of Netanyahu. We all know that. And here they are saying, look, Israel went above and beyond. It signed off on an extraordinary offer. If they're saying it, I think we, here in Israel, can take that on board, take that at face value, and believe that. I think that is the case, that the war cabinet headed by Netanyahu signed off on 3 offers in recent months, each one going further than the last one.
Yeah, well, there are sources being quoted in the United States saying that there's no such not such a big difference between what Hamas said and Israel offered. Netanyahu has just said that there's a huge difference. So we're still moving around this.
I think the United States, at the end of the day, wants to see this conflict go away because that is what they believe serves their interest. They want to avoid a regional war. They have elections to worry about. And this is where the American and the Israeli interests split. They differ. Allies can have different interests. Israel has to make sure that it's not walking into a trap, that it's not going to allow Hamas to essentially push it into a situation where it by de facto accepts a permanent end to the war, because that would be a disaster for southern Israel, for the continuity of our country. We can't live with Hamas coming back into power. That would really be a terrible defeat.
If I might, I'm not a spokesman for the Israeli government, certainly not a spokesman for the Biden administration, but I think I can give you the American perspective because I've heard it enough from senior officials, and that is this. They feel that the war objectives established by Israel are not realistic, that Israel cannot destroy Hamas. You can downgrade it, but it's going to pop up behind you as it did at Shifa Hospital, and Israel's going to be bogged down in a counterinsurgency for many years, especially since the Israeli government has not provided a day-after scenario that's very compelling to the administration. They also feel that moving into Rafah will cause a great number of Palestinian casualties, which will have ramifications throughout the region. It'll obviate the chances of reaching that peace agreement with with Saudi Arabia, or constructing that regional architecture against Iran, and certainly complicate the Biden administration's electoral issues and problems in the United States. And therefore, they would like to see the war ended, Israel saying, listen, we caused enough damage to the Palestinians. We sent the message. October 7th was a really bad idea. And through international cooperation, we can keep Hamas bottled up in Rafah, including controlling the Philadelphia routes. Hamas can't rearm, and eventually Hamas will sort of dry up on the vine.
So maybe the Hamas could act as a terrorist organization, but do anybody believe that Hamas will come back to control and rule Gaza?
If there's nobody in the Gaza Strip to prevent that from happening, is there anybody who believes that they won't? Mm-hmm. It's clear to I think most...
Is it Israel's fault that there's nobody there to take their role?
I think that a major mistake that the war cabinet here has made is not setting up an IDF civil administration. There is really nobody else who can take over Gaza right now. Every candidate that we can think of, local Gazans, a multinational Arab force, international force, you name it, they can't go in now. It's not realistic.
Neither the PA?
The PA can't survive there, I think, for very long at all. So I think really at this stage, it's the IDF that needs to set up a civil administration. And it's kind of being dragged into that anyway, because who's going to secure this pier that the Americans are setting, the floating pier? Who's securing all of these trucks? It's the IDF. That's already beginning to take on operations that are civilian in nature. So there's a de facto sort of creeping civilian administration that's already being formed, not officially. Why not make it official? Why not set this up and then talk about a handoff when that becomes appropriate? I think that would be definitely in Israel's interest to do.
Agreed.
That.
Yeah, agreed.
Agreed. I think I think Israel should enter into an intimate dialogue with the Biden administration about a number of issues. The day after scenario, the Biden administration and the Saudis talk about a pathway to a Palestinian state. It's a pathway. They all use that word, the P word. And they're very adamant about it because they know that we can talk about a pathway that doesn't really mean you're committing yourself to a Palestinian state. Just talked about that. It doesn't cost us anything to talk, Yaakov. It doesn't cost us anything to talk. But when it comes to our actual, solid security interests there, we don't even give. Give where you can, but stick your ground where you can.
All right. Let's go to Bastian Bari in Dubai for some reactions there in the Gulf after the past 24 hours since the Hamas submitted their official response. Bastian, good evening, and give us the latest from there.
Well, as for the Rafah incursion starting from the Emirates, I think Abu Dhabi feels somewhat taken by surprise at this point in time, because Benjamin Netanyahu had said that the Israeli military was planning to coordinate with not only the UAE but also Egypt to move Palestinians from Rafah to supposed humanitarian enclaves to be constructed within the Gaza Strip with food, water, medical services, and so on and so forth. Obviously, it didn't happen, as Israel has given priority to reinforcing its military presence around Rafah. Thus, the Emiratis today reiterated their condemnation of any forced displacement of Palestinians, in contrast to the displacement that would have been somewhat encouraged by relocation to these camps. And as for Saudi Arabia, the tone has been stronger. Riyadh speaks of a bloody and systematic campaign aimed at forcefully displacing Palestinians from the Gaza Strip, denounces the, quote, Israeli war machine, and calls for international intervention to stop the targeting of Rafah.
What about the Qataris? There was talk about American pressure on Qatar, which, of course, hosts the leadership of Hamas.
And also, as I say, as for the hostage deal, if you want a global point of view about the Gulf, even if the Saudis, for instance, have their hands tied because of their terrible relations with Hamas and their inability to influence these negotiations, we can see that Riyadh is putting in less and less effort when it comes to the hostages. We know, of course, that the Americans are offering them a defense pact and a deal for the transfer of civilian nuclear technology in exchange for the normalization of relations with Israel. But now the Saudis have a plan B, which is the completion of all these US-Saudi deals, unconditional on the normalization pact and other deals that would help release those hostages, which sounds like rhetoric and a way for Saudi Arabia to put pressure on Israel. And pretty much the same goes for Qatar. Doha is still trying to put pressure on both Netanyahu and Hamas, notably today in Cairo, although unsuccessfully, which tarnishes its image. Because Qatar is a country that's very concerned about its image. And seeing the Israeli Prime Minister and several American congressmen, even if it's for electoral interest, criticizing the ineffectiveness of the Qataris reveals in a way the limits of Qatar's power, which are real. So Doha is upset and sends threats to both Netanyahu and Hamas, but there's very little chance to see the Qataris distance themselves. On the contrary, they want to keep Hamas alive, to maintain leverage on Israel. So it's, to answer your question, it's very unlikely that the future of Hamas doesn't remain in Qatar for quite some time.
Interesting to be seen. Thank you very much, Bastian Bourret in Dubai. Now with us is Hiba Al-Qudsi, Washington Bureau Chief of Sharq Al-Awsat newspaper. Thank you very much for joining us. Good to see you again.
Thank you for inviting me.
And let's talk about Saudi Arabia. The Saudi Arabian reaction, of course, it's behind the scene, but a very important actor in this war and what's going on. How is this seen in Riyadh?
No, it wasn't behind the scene. There was a very harsh announcement and statement that warned that Saudi Arabia is warning the consequences of this invasion of Rafah and the humanitarian catastrophe that Saudi Arabia is accusing Israel of a systematic operation to invade all region of Gaza Strip. This is very harsh, and the narration in Saudi Arabia that this is a violation of the humanitarian laws, violation of the international community resolution to end this crisis, and it will definitely complicate the talks about a ceasefire with Hamas, complicate the possible release of the hostage and the exchange of Israeli hostages for Palestinian prisoners. And moreover, this will put more risk on the steps and talks and negotiation to normalize ties between Saudi Arabia and Israel. This is all these aspects at risk. And with the international community warned, especially the WHO, the UNRWA, and several other international organizations are warning about loss of lives, about worsening the humanitarian situation and worsening the level of hunger and the lack of food, water, and medicine.
But still, after all of that, this grand deal and normalization is still on the table.
It's still on the table, but Israel has to reconsider its priorities. What's their priorities? They have a path to normalize ties with Saudi Arabia, to gain some kind of stability, geopolitical stability in the region, have the Arab regional powers to support the reconstruction of Gaza Strip, had this very generous deal of normalization, but yet they are, Israel is challenging Biden administration, challenging the international community, challenging every warning, and going without any consultation, even with the Egyptian authorities that are raising concerns about the possibility of Hamas militants flee over the border to Sinai and cause security problems. Even civilians can flee from the border, and there is no guarantee that Israel will allow these civilians to go back to Gaza after the war ends. So the situation is very fragile, and the risk are really very high.
Hiba Al-Qudsi, thank you very much for that. Gentlemen in the studio, we have about a minute each to try to tell us where we are, especially vis-a-vis this option with the Saudis.
I think that the Rafah operation is going to have its own momentum, that Israel's not going to be able to maintain this sort of surgical pinpoint strike strategy for very long. Our soldiers will be exposed. Hamas will keep on shelling border communities as they've done just recently in the last couple of hours. And it'll become, the force also of Israeli public opinion will come to bear. And that's going to set into motion a number of processes, including extreme tension with the United States, the international community, action by the ICC, action by the Security Council. We should brace ourselves.
I think that normalization with Saudi Arabia is extremely important. It's not more important than preventing Hamas from ever again posing the threat that it posed on the eve of October 7th. That's the most important thing for Israel to do. There are a whole host of elements that are coming together to try and prevent Israel from destroying its enemy. Simply as that, they're not used to this, seeing this happening. We have always been in the rounds logic. This is different. This is going to be different. And that includes the possibility of a hostage deal. And I think that, you know, behind closed doors, the Sunni powers would also very much like to see Hamas removed from the map, even if they can't say so openly.
Thank you very much, both of you gentlemen. This is it for now. Have a good night from Tel Aviv.
To turn our attention now to Iran, though, where the opposition says that the regime has used the recent exchange with Israel to crack down on dissent at home. In one instance, a popular Iranian rapper has just been sentenced to death for supporting anti-government protests. Tamaj Salehi's song supported protests in 2022 that erupted over the death of Mahsa Amini, a woman who died in the religious police custody after violating the national dress code. Salehi was first arrested back in October of 2022 after making public statements in support of protests, and he was then sentenced to 6 years and 3 months in prison. But in January, Isfahan's Revolutionary Court accused the performer of new charges that included corruption on earth, armed rebellion, assembly and collusion, propaganda against the ruling establishment, and inciting riots. Well, now we are joined on the line by Vahid Beheshti, human rights activist from London and a member of the Iranian diaspora. I'd like to get your reaction to this development, Vahid.
Thank you. So if we have to see, first of all, I think what is the situation of the regime. So if we analyze the behavior of the regime, especially in past few weeks, we are witnessing the intensification of repression of women in the street, different streets of Iran, especially capital city from one side. Since the new conflict started between Israel and the regime, this intensification of repression of women started in especially Tehran, and now we are witnessing issuing death sentence to Tamaj Salehi. Tamaj Salehi is not just a rapper, as you mentioned. He's the leader. He's one of the young, brave leader of the woman life freedom movement of Iranians. So why regime target in past few weeks the two wings of the Iranian movements against the regime? Women from one side, women life freedom, women from one side, and the young brave leaders like too much. Why? So if we go back, we see in past 3 months, the Iranian people, they write on different walls, they hung banner in different streets, and they are asking Israel They're asking Israel to come and strike the bases of IRGC, the sites of the nuclear sites of the regime, the house of the high officials, and they say, Israel, come and hit them, leave the rest for us. So the Iranian people and Israel are united more than ever at this time, and the regime has this fear. If Israel continue with this strike inside of Iran, and the Iranian people are embracing this strike as a support to them to come back to the street, to give them this opportunity to come back to the street to raise against the regime again. So this is the fear of the regime. That's why they increase the level of repression of people in the Iran. So do not think if Israel continue with their strike inside of Iran, you can do this. Why they are so in this, they are really fearful, because we as Iranian and Israel united, we are united, we are more than united, more than ever, against this common enemy, against this evil regime. And we found that the Achilles heel of the regime. As I said, this regime is really good when it comes to proxy wars, when it comes to creating division inside the country. What they are doing really now in Israel to create division between Israelis and increase pressure on the government and brainwashing are used. They are good in this stuff, in proxy wars. But when it comes inside of Iran, where they don't have any legitimacy, when they know they cannot tolerate they cannot confront Israel with the military force. They know they are nothing against the air force of Israel. They know this stuff. So they have to put fear inside of Iranian people. Do not think even to be united with Israel. If Israel continue with the attacks, you have a chance to come back to the street and raise against us. That's why we are seeing this kind of death sentence, increasing the level of oppression in past few weeks. But what we can do, this regime, as I said many times, I said in Knesset 3 months ago, when I was talking to the ministers in Knesset, I said to in DC 3 weeks ago in Congress, this regime only understands one language, and that is force. We have to increase the price of this kind of behavior for the regime. For example, if they are thinking to execute too much or any other leaders like too much or any other people, we have to increase the price for them so they do not think about even going near this kind of acts to spread fear, because that's their mission, to spread fear inside the society. I think that's how we can analyze the behavior of the regime.
Well, it's definitely a major challenge to unravel how the West is going to develop its strategy going forward. Thank you very much, Vijay, for breaking that all down for us. Nations Security Council held a meeting on the humanitarian situation in Gaza. They demanded that Israel allow a sustained flow of aid into the Gaza Strip. This even as the German government plans to resume cooperation and funding for the UNRWA organization in Gaza. The decision follows an investigation by former French Foreign Minister Catherine Colonna into whether some UNRWA members were involved in the October 7th atrocities by Hamas. The review of the agency's neutrality on Monday concluded that Israel had yet to back up its accusations that hundreds of UNRWA staff were operatives in Gaza terrorist groups. But this comes as Israeli watchdog says the panel completely ignored hundreds of pages of supporting evidence, amounting to the international community burying its collective heads in the sands. Well, joining us now is Marcus Sheff, the CEO of the Institute for Monitoring Peace and Cultural Tolerance in School Education. Walk us through just what the claims being made here are, because your organization, I believe, supplied 245 pages of dossier for this investigation.
We did, Ariel, and thank you very much. I would just like to repeat what your last guest said, that textbooks are absolutely key to any possibility of de-radicalization in Gaza in the future, and we cannot take our eye off that ball. Sadly, the United Nations is not capable of looking at that ball squarely at all. You know, in October the 7th, 3,000 terrorists who stormed the international border, who raped, who murdered who took young and elderly over to Gaza to incarcerate them, who burned people in their homes. The majority of those people went to UNRWA schools in Gaza because UNRWA schools are the majority in Gaza. There they teach the Palestinian Authority's curriculum, which has been condemned by parliaments, including the European Union's parliament. UNRWA does not have to teach this hateful curriculum, and yet it does. UNRWA has its own hateful self-produced material, which it has been propagating to UNRWA schools for years and years now. Teachers are Hamas members, and this is well documented. And so it is clear after October the 7th that what was necessary was a proper, professional, and I stress external audit of UNRWA. And what the world got instead was an internal, collegial, sympathetic whitewash, and really pains me to use that word, but that is exactly what happened here. UNRWA is under a great deal of pressure. It is the biggest UN organization. Clearly, the UN felt it needed to protect its 30,000 employees. And so the result was concerns about UNRWA's employees' ties to Hamas were ignored. The minimization of the severity of the hate teaching the Palestinian Authority, the own produced inflammatory self-produced materials entirely ignored. And, as you say, the extensive evidence in our 245-page dossier was ignored as well. We were the only non-governmental, if you like, organization, a research institute, not a watchdog, that was invited to testify to Ms. Colonna. We spent a considerable amount of time with her and with the Scandinavian organizations that also came into town. I did not expect too much from those organizations. It is well documented that they are extraordinarily hostile in every single way to Israel's position. For Ms. Colonna, I'm just extraordinarily disappointed. We presented to her verbally, we gave her the dossier, and this evidence was disregarded.
If they're willing to completely disregard the evidence, then what hope is there for a reform of UNRWA to make sure, or at least some major changes, to make sure they can no longer pump radicalization and hate into the minds of young people and turn them into a generation of soldiers?
Well, look, the United Nations can scurry around doing as many internal reports as it likes, which paints a rosy picture of what is, frankly, a radical extremist organization. That's what UNRWA is. And again, it really pains me to say this. It is a United Nations organization. It had a duty of care to hundreds of thousands of children, and it entirely abrogated that duty of care. None of this brings me pleasure to say, but there are those who absolutely understand that this organization can no longer continue in the way it has in the past. That is the reason that the United States has cut all of its UNRWA funding. That's $400 million. That is the reason why the Gulf states know exactly what UNRWA is and are not in the least bit happy that UNRWA can continue along this path of radicalizing children in the way that it has done. I think this report will bring in more European funding. I think that's what it was set up to do, to essentially release the frozen European funds. But there are players around the world who no longer want anything to do with this organization and who understand there are absolutely alternatives. There are organizations, United Nations and non-United Nations, all over the world, who are teaching children in all kinds of setups, permanent, temporary, and they're not radicalizing them. The idea that UNRWA has no choice but to radicalize children is an absolutely preposterous idea. We entirely reject it as a research institute into peace and tolerance. We know for an absolute fact that rewriting the Palestinian curriculum, which is not as onerous as it sounds, these are 240 textbooks, this is entirely doable in a matter of months, and will go a long, long way in the de-radicalization process. Listen, other things have to happen. Teachers need to be screened without a shadow of a doubt. You can't have teachers who are members of Hamas and members of Islamic Jihad. This is preposterous. So teachers need to be screened. Teachers need to be taught how to teach again. But again, not impossible. This is done all over the world. This can be done in Gaza. What we can't do is to be sucked into this idea that only UNRWA can do this job, and UNRWA is absolutely fine. We're just going to have another 7th of October. God help us. We cannot be in that position again. And the textbooks, the schools, UNRWA lie at the very heart of the problem.
Pro-Palestinian and anti-Israel protests and encampments are continuing to ramp up on university campuses across the United States. Take a look at this.
Everyone feels good about moving forward. Does that make sense? All right, let's do it.
In the face of NYPD police, the anti-Israel demonstrators at Columbia University are fearlessly continuing their tirade and their encampment.
We are not backing down. We are not backing down. Free Palestine. Free Palestine.
After arresting several violent protesters, canceling classes, and calling on Jewish students to stay home for their own safety during Passover, still, even professors are refusing to back down.
The president's decision to send riot police to pick up peaceful protesters on our campus was unprecedented, unjustified, disproportionate, divisive, and dangerous.
Jewish students continue to feel threatened at NYU as well, with the NYPD needing to be called to quell the tension and making several arrests.
If there's any student, Jewish or whoever, that's been assaulted or wants to make a police report or wants to talk to the police, we encourage them to call 911.
The anti-Israel demonstrations continue across university campuses in the entire United States, reaching a fever pitch, including universities in Washington State and even Berkeley in California.
I and many other Jewish students on this campus do believe that it is our duty to step up because of our Jewish values, because we are a people who has been in diaspora for so long, because we know what it feels like to be put into shtetls. We know what it feels like to be the victims of a genocide. And we believe that when we say never again, it means never again for anyone.
Let Gaza live! Let Gaza live!
And even Jews took part in a Brooklyn protest in front of the home of Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer.
Senator Schumer, your Jewish constituents and the vast majority of the U.S. demands stop arming Israel! Stop arming Israel!
All of the Jews that I know and love, my family and friends, are all horrified by what the Biden administration is doing. And so I worry that he's losing a lot of support.
This is what community looks like!
Emily Francis, I-24 News.
All right, well, Columbia University, which has really been all over the news for the protests taking place there, now says that it's making important progress with pro-Palestinian student protesters who set up the tent encampment there, and is now extending the deadline for those students to clear it out amid negotiations with the protests organizers. Well, joining us now is Jewish rights activist Rudy Rachman, an alumni of Columbia University. Now, Rudy, videos of these pro-Palestinian protests are spreading like wildfire on social media. On one hand, Jewish students say that these protests are simply anti-Israel, not anti-war. And on the other hand, you have those who are claiming that they're peaceful. What is actually going on here?
Thank you, Natasha. Well, first of all, we need to understand that these students are not pro-Palestinian, because if you care about Palestinians, you need to care about all Palestinians, not just some. And what I mean by that is when Palestinians are dying by the thousands in the Syrian civil war, these students and professors and administrators, they don't talk about them. When Palestinians are by the hundreds of thousands of refugee camps in Lebanon or in Jordan, they don't talk about them. When they're suffering under the Palestinian Authority or Hamas, they don't talk about them. When they're suffering on the border of Gaza and Egypt, they don't talk about them. They care only about Palestinian suffering, which is legitimate when it has to do with Israel. But of course, they remove all the context as to why we even got into this situation in order to cherry pick instances of Palestinian suffering.
Tel Aviv is ranked the happiest city in the world and the best place to own a home. For 3 generations, the Ben Shalom family has built boutique apartment buildings in the most desirable locations. From restoration in historical locales to homes along Park Hayarkon, Ben Shalom is a one-stop shop from start to finish and friends for life.
Esta semana en News 24, Israel bajo ataque. News 24 en español trae el análisis y la información de los acontecimientos de la guerra Espadas de Hierro.
Entrevistas exclusivas, reportes desde la zona de guerra, la reacción de los países hispanoparlantes.
News 24, el único medio en español que te mantiene informado y conectado con la comunidad latina en Israel. News 24 únicamente en i24 News.
Welcome to this special broadcast on I-24 News. I'm Caleb Ben David. It's day 214 of Israel at war, and the IDF is on the offensive in Rafah, Gaza's southernmost city and the last stronghold of Hamas in the Strip. By this early morning, Israeli forces had seized control of the Rafah crossing between Gaza and Egypt, along with key roadways in the area. Meanwhile, Israeli mediators returned to Cairo to continue negotiations for a hostage deal, until the government said that the Egyptian proposal that Hamas yesterday said it had agreed to was not the version signed off on in Jerusalem. More on the IDF's push into Rafah in this report from Adam Bernitz.
Rafah on edge, day 214 of Israel at war. The IDF carried out targeted airstrikes in the Rafah area overnight, and tanks entered the Palestinian side of the border crossing with Egypt on Tuesday morning.
Last night, I ordered, with the approval of the War Cabinet, an operation in Rafah. Within hours, our forces raised the Israeli flag at the Rafah crossing and took down the Hamas flag. The entry into Rafah serves two main war goals: the return of our hostages and the elimination of Hamas.
Yesterday, I ordered the IDF to enter Rafah and seize the crossing to carry out its tasks. This operation will continue until we eliminate Hamas in the Rafah area and the entire Gaza Strip, or until the first abductee returns. And it will happen all over the Strip, in the south, in the center, and in the north. We know that Hamas only understands force.
Israeli military vehicles were spotted along the Egypt-Gaza border in the eastern part of Rafah. The 401st Armored Brigade spearheading the capture of the Rafah crossing Tuesday morning, following an extensive wave of attacks on Rafah overnight. The capture of Salah ad-Din Road in eastern Rafah is a strategic development which further solidifies the IDF's operational control over the Rafah crossing, Gaza's only outlet to the Arab world. The United States and international powers have maintained a harsh stance against Israel launching a ground operation in Rafah. Led by the US, they have voiced major concerns about how displaced Gazans sheltering there will fare in any Israeli operation.
I want to take a moment to address the latest reports now out of Rafah, which was also a topic of discussion on the call. I'll reiterate again that we cannot and we will not speak for IDF operations, but we've made clear our views about operations in Rafah that could potentially put more than 1 million innocent people at greater risk.
The IDF's limited scope operation began at midnight and saw airstrikes targeting over 50 Hamas sites in the area. According to IDF reports, these strikes resulted in the elimination of at least 20 Hamas militants. The Israeli army bombed 50 targets and found 3 large tunnels during overnight Rafah crossing operations. In the aftermath, Gazans expressed anger as they rummaged through the rubble.
We don't say, except that I swear to God, be patient and we will remain steadfast on this land, God willing. We are waiting for liberation, and this battle will be for liberation, God willing. We will be a malaise to the enemy. This is God's promise to us, and God will not break his promise.
On Monday, the IDF had ordered the evacuation of around 100,000 Palestinian civilians in Rafah, out of over 1 million, as it moved toward a limited initial invasion of the last remaining Hamas stronghold in the enclave. Israeli Foreign Minister Katz said the entry of the IDF into Rafah promoted the 2 main goals of the war, the release of the hostages and the defeat of Hamas. Hamas is claimed to have somewhere between 4,000 and 8,000 fighters left, including at least 4 battalions in Rafah, out of the around 35,000 terrorists that it had prior to the war starting on October 7th. The terror group insinuated that any future battles in Rafah will not be easy for the IDF. Meanwhile, the fate of the Israeli hostages held by Hamas hangs in the balance.
And for more, let's go to our correspondent, Nicole Tzedek, who is down by the Gaza border in southern Israel. Nicole, IDF forces on the move there in Rafah. But in the meantime, there continue to be rocket attacks from that area into that area where you are, that border area with Israel's border area with Gaza.
Yes, the IDF says within the past hour and a half, about 12 rockets were fired from the southern part of the Gaza Strip into some of these southern border communities, specifically the Kisufim, Ra'im areas around there. And out of the 12 rockets that were fired, the Iron Dome intercepted 5, and the IDF says the other 7 fell in open areas. So this certainly indicates, Caleb, that as the IDF is pushing forward and operating in some of these Hamas strongholds in, just for now, more of the eastern part of the Rafah neighborhoods, still Hamas is firing their arsenals and the weapons that they have in that area towards all of these different southern Israeli communities. So this is what we're seeing for the most part. Israel says that although this is a limited in scope operation for now, if there is no movement on the hostage negotiations, they're ready to continue with a wider operation, not just in Rafah, but all throughout the Gaza Strip. And now we're hearing from the the White House National Security Advisor, John Kirby, recognizing that they know what's happening here is a limited in scope operation, stating that from the U.S. perspective, this operation in Rafah, specifically with the Rafah border crossing, is to make sure that there's no weapons or funds being smuggled through this border crossing. That's what the U.S. says. They say this is limited in scope, but once again, we're almost seeing, I don't want to say contradictory messaging, because Israel has said that so far this is limited in scope, and the United States still reiterating that they don't want to see a larger offensive than this, but Israel giving the messaging that this could just be the beginning if there is not more pressure put on Hamas to agree to some sort of a deal on the table.
Right, and I think Israel, Prime Minister Netanyahu has made it clear, even if this is limited at the beginning, even if there is a hostage deal, ultimately Israel will move into Rafah to try to wipe out the last of the military capabilities of Hamas. In the meantime, Nicole Tzedek there on the Gaza border. Thank you for that. And we have with us in studio Reserves IDF Major General Eitan Dangot. He's the former military secretary to 3 Israeli defense ministers, former head of Kogat, and Ambassador Danny Ayalon, the former Israeli ambassador to the U.S., former deputy foreign minister, now chairman of Silver Road Capital. And Eitan, you called it in this office, you said a limited operation at first, but the key, seizing that border crossing and those key roadways there in that south and eastern part of Rafah. What comes next?
So next is to wait. So the first stage has been done. You see it's full coordinate with Egypt, with the United States. The way they express of the goal of this start is also something that are well listening by the United States and Egypt to what we are talking about. It means release agreement on releasing the hostages and also weakness the Hamas. So it's two together. But if Hamas is not going towards agreement and is not changing what they published yesterday about what they are like to agree, I think then the gap between those two goals will not meet each other. And it means that expanding the activities towards the western side of Rafah, towards the north part of Rafah,
where all those civilians are,
civilians
still hundreds
will be
of thousands.
More complicated. Till now, Kalev, you see that Hamas is withdrawing. They are not looking for having a clash with the IDF in this stage because they know what will be the results. They are together with the civilians, hiding, preparing the underground also, tunnels, spears, and all these kind of activities that has been. In such occasion, while this operation will have to continue and to expand itself, it will emphasize us, I think, the tension that can raise up between Israel, United States, and...
Well, let me ask then the former Israeli ambassador to the U.S. So far, on the diplomatic front of this operation, Israel has been successful in keeping off some of that pressure. But at some point, as Eitan says, it may have to more directly contradict the state of intentions, especially of Washington.
Yeah, well, Kalev, I think this is the right observation. So far, diplomatically, we have had the upper hand for a change. And this is because Hamas overplayed its hand. And they thought that they can really, change the entire situation. And they were looking at us as if they were the winner. And they're intransigence, their way, they didn't want to move. They're, I would say, also cheating. They're like crooks, cheating the Egyptians, cheating the Americans, even just with childlike or childish maneuvers, by trying to put into different words into the agreement. For instance, the one thing that really made Israel, and rightly so mad, is that they added just one little word, about the hostages coming back. The first 33 hostages, they said they would bring them back dead or alive. No. That means, they can kill them all and send them. So I think this was kind of what was the straw that broke the camel.
A miscalculation. Now, as we did report earlier, the Israeli government has sent mediators back to Cairo to continue talks towards a hostage deal, while saying, as Danny pointed out, the version of the agreement that Hamas yesterday said it accepted was not, in fact, the same version that was earlier agreed to by Israel. Well, Guy Azrieli breaks down the key differences between those hostage deals and where the negotiations could go from here.
Jubilant cheers in Rafah last night, shortly after Hamas announced that it had accepted the mediators' proposal for a ceasefire deal with Israel. Officials in Jerusalem, however, quickly downplayed the early celebrations. A statement issued by the office of Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu stated that the war cabinet unanimously decided to continue the military operation in Rafah in order to apply military pressure on Hamas, also adding that the Hamas proposal is far from Israel's core demands, and yet today an Israeli delegation will depart to Cairo to exhaust the possibility of reaching an agreement acceptable to Israel.
We are examining every proposal and exhausting every possibility when it comes to the negotiations and the return of the hostages as our main mission. At the same time, we continue to operate in the Gaza Strip and will continue to do so.
Hamas's announcement came as a surprise for Israel as it started its offense on Hamas in Rafah. The deal proposed by the terror group and the mediators is, however, very different from the one Israel initially agreed to. According to Hamas officials, the first phase would include a 42-day truce period, during which the IDF would withdraw from the central corridor dividing the Strip and would see the return of residents to the northern part of the Strip. The second phase would see an end to all IDF operations, as well as a complete withdrawal of Israeli troops from Gaza. And in the third stage, an end to the Israeli blockade of the enclave and a 3 to 5 year reconstruction plan for Gaza. In the first phase, Hamas is said to gradually release 33 Israeli captives, both dead and alive. This is contrary to Israel's demand of only receiving live hostages. The rate of release is also significantly slowed down in the new outline. 3 hostages in the third day, and then 3 more every 7 days, when the rest of the captives will only be released at the end of the period. The second phase will see the release of all Israeli men who are still alive, both civilians and soldiers, and the third and last phase, an exchange of bodies and remains. Even if it agrees to discuss the details of the proposal, there is great doubt whether Israel will be able to accept the above clauses, which, in practice, would mean the end of the war without the elimination of Hamas in Gaza.
Well, we spoke earlier about U.S. reaction to these events, the standstill or perhaps even potential collapse of a hostage deal, Israel's beginning offensive into Rafah. Well, for more on the reactions out of Washington, let's go to our senior U.S. correspondent, Mike Wagenheim. He joins us from New York. And Mike, this is not what the Biden administration wanted to see. A standstill, if even that in the hostage talks, Israel beginning its move into Rafah. How is the response coming from Washington?
So far, most of Washington waiting to see how this thing plays out at this point and whether there can be a deal to be had at this moment in time. And the big question now is the trust factor, as it has been for some time, but even more so now, between the Biden administration and the Netanyahu government. The New York Times reporting that CIA Director Bill Burns essentially signed off on changes and didn't alert Israel to them, or at least wasn't communicative enough. Hamas accepts the deal that Burns signed off on, and Israel says, well, that's not exactly what we had in mind. It's not workable for us, and it's almost not back to square one, but right back to the drawing board again in terms of what's acceptable and what's not. So Israel chose not to send a delegation. There are some in the Biden administration that are saying that wasn't a good move. If they were there, they could have seen these changes in real time. They could have asked questions in real time, and you wouldn't be back to this problematic deal once again. So for the most part right now, at least on the Democratic side, there's no barbs being exchanged. There's no questioning of motivations on the Israeli side. At this point, everybody's kind of laying low, wanting to see how this plays out before they start to lay blame, before they start to go back to the proverbial drawing board again.
Right. And Mike, we'll have a bit of President Biden giving a speech more focused on anti-Semitism just earlier in the Capitol. We'll have a little more of that later in the show, but also reaffirming ironclad commitment to Israel's security. But many are wondering about that with the reports of a holding up of the latest arms shipment to Israel.
Yeah, tomorrow's going to be a really big day on the Israel-U.S. front here. There's a report due to Congress from the State Department as to whether Israel has been abiding by international humanitarian law in terms of allowing humanitarian aid into Gaza on a number of fronts as well in terms of international law. A major report that's due that the State Department needs to sign off on and say that Israel is adhering to these international requirements in order to keep military aid and weapons transfers flowing to Israel. If the State Department and the Biden admin at large doesn't sign off on it, that creates a whole world of complications in terms of the ending of some military aid and weapons transfers. There are Democrats right now, especially to the left of Biden, that are pushing the State Department not to sign off on that. They say there's just too much evidence that Israel has not been adhering to those requirements that have been laid out for quite some time in American law that was passed by Congress many years ago. The Israelis are saying, hey, we got to defend ourselves here. You got to stick up for us here. You say you have an ironclad commitment, show it. It's this point in time you really need to show it. That's the message right now to the White House. There's no telling what exactly the State Department is going to send to Congress tomorrow, but it's going to have a domino effect one way or another, whether it's the continuation of weapons transfers to Israel. That's going to draw the ire of some Democratic Congress members, especially in the Senate. If they cut off some of those transfers, well, that's just going to create a wider rift right now in the U.S.-Israeli relationship. So look for that report tomorrow. It's going to be big news one way or another.
And, of course, we'll follow up on that. Mike Wagenheim, thank you for that. And, Danny, trouble on several fronts in the U.S.-Israel relationship, especially on the hostage negotiations. Was there bad faith on the American side? Was it carelessness on the Israeli side, or a combination of both?
Well, I tell you, Caleb, I know Bill Burns personally.
Right.
We worked very closely together during my 4.5 years in Washington. He was the NEA, the Assistant Secretary of State for Near East. He's an honorable man. He is a seasoned diplomat. I think there is a matter maybe of fatigue, and sometimes, the change was just of one word. They just added dead. Instead of alive, they added dead or alive. So it could easily be just an honest mistake.
Okay, big word, though.
A big word and an honest mistake, and which shows, again, the character of Hamas, how they are operating. I hope this will backlash against them, and the U.S. will understand that they must back up their best friend and ally here in the Middle East. And about the Democrats, we have to remember it's a minority. Still, I mean, they put the verdict before they even know the facts.
Right.
They're not confused by the facts. It's like
you're talking about the left wing of the Democrats,
only the left
not
wing,
the center, the mainstream.
Right.
That still is very supportive
right.
of Israel.
The progressive left, which is, I would say, on the verge of anarchism,
Right.
and they are as much against the United States as they are against Israel or all Western democracies. And what they do here, and I hope that the report by the State Department tomorrow will be an honest one, because in any judicial system, you don't have to prove you didn't do something. You have to prove that the third party did it. And I don't think that State Department or anyone else can prove Israel wrongly used the weapons.
Right.
But I would like to add to Danny, there is but. What is the fact? First of all, I think that Hamas is a very serious strategic organization from my experience. And I think they demonstrate self-confidence concerning their offer in order to show they are realize that the United States are very demonstration concerning the way to reach agreement. And because of it, and the Israeli mistake not to be in Cairo on Saturday, and the arrival of the head of the CIA back to Qatar after them give them the motivation and the self-confidence to come with such offer. On the other hand, from my experience with the State Department, I don't think that Israel has so strong stone base in the State Department concerning such a report. And in my opinion, I will not be surprised tomorrow to reach the first break on the tense between Israel and the United States.
Okay, well, yes, there are those that say in the State Department, especially the bureaucrats.
Except one last thing is that they don't have the last word. The last word is by the White House.
Okay.
So it will be interesting to see what it comes out.
We'll see how that comes out. Well, let's turn our attention now from Gaza to northern Israel, where there continues to be an exchange of fire across the Lebanese border with Hezbollah. Fire that yesterday claimed the lives of 2 Israeli reserve soldiers killed by an explosive drone near the village of Metula. Today, funerals were held for Master Sergeants Dan Kamkagi and Nachman Natan Hertz, both of them reservists 31 years old. Their deaths bring to 13 the number of IDF troops killed in the north since October 7th, alongside 9 civilians. For more, let's go to our correspondent in northern Israel near the Lebanese border, Zach Anders. And Zach, unfortunately, those fatalities indicating to us just how serious that exchange of fire continues to be in the north.
It does, and Metula is somewhere I've been before. The real remarkable thing about this area is, one, it's surrounded. You can see Lebanon on all sides. And the other point being that these soldiers are largely in the civilian homes and in these areas where much of the people obviously have left, but the civilians have their homes have kind of been converted for the soldiers to stage in these areas. And it's remarkable to see, once again, them come under fire. There's been another attack on Metula. Hezbollah has claimed responsibility for at 7:35 local time here tonight as well. Another attack. This appears to be another rocket launch from an ATGM. So it underscores how dangerous this situation still is here, and the amount of attacks have picked up considerably. I know we talk a lot about the ebb and flow of the Hezbollah attacks that emanate from southern Lebanon, but today Hezbollah claimed responsibility for 8 of those attacks at this point in the night. And it does appear that today has been more active with additional drone launches. The IDF reporting no casualties today, but some light damage caused by drones that were intercepted, and 2 of them fell in open areas, the IDF says, and one of those starting a fire involving the local fire brigades here.
All right, Zach Anders there in northern Israel. Thank you for that. Eitan, Zach points out, Metula, those who know it, it's literally sitting right on the border with Lebanon. It's hard to imagine any air defense system could stop anything fired just from meters away. But is the IDF doing enough to protect the soldiers that are stationed there? Should they be in civilian homes or some kind of better, I don't know what, but sort of more secure quarters?
Absolutely. I think that IDF a very strong, immediate adventure in order to create the system to defend and to destroy these suicide drones that are coming after. There are drones that collect the intelligence. The short distance give them something like advantage. And we need to stop it immediately, not even in Metula. It happened already. It's, in my opinion, the 4th or the 5th time.
Right. Of course, we saw what happened a few weeks ago. Yes.
Yes. So what's going now that has become a kind of advantage to Hezbollah in some places in achieving, in such cases of attacking, they have some achievements. And I think this is one of the things that bothering the IDF and has to change the concept of how to deploy the soldiers. Secondly, the technology that should be used against and destroy.
I mean, where is this late experimental laser system that has been discussed?
But that will take time. We are now in a war, and we have to develop the solution now, and we have the solution. The third is to attack in the depth of the Lebanon, in the places where these drones are holding, producing, are moving from a place to place. We have maybe, in order to close it, to expand the attacks in Lebanon, and that brings us to the very short distance between the stage that we are now to a war with Lebanon, and you connect it to the south, we are in a very sensitive time.
All right, well, the IDF has shown great capabilities of adapting. It's never faced these kind of explosive drones in a combat situation before, and it's going to have to adapt very quickly to them. Eitan Dangot, Ambassador Daniel Alon, stay with us. We are going out for a brief break, but we'll have more coming up in our special report. It's day 214 again of Israel at war on multiple fronts. Stay with us.
Israel's story must reach the whole world. The I-24 News Channel, broadcasting from Israel, with dozens of correspondents throughout the world, brings the truth from Israel to hundreds of millions of people in scores of countries.
Completely gunned down in their beds.
De la frontière qui sépare Israël,
the state of emergency and war in Israel.
Bringing Israel's story to the world. I-24 News Channels. Now on Hot.
Welcome back to this special broadcast on I-24 News, Israel at war. Now, as we've mentioned, it was the failure to reach a hostage deal with Hamas that spurred the government to give the green light for the IDF to begin its offensive into Rafah. And there are those who say that only by continuing that operation will the terror group finally agree, if Hamas does at all, to genuinely come to a freeing of some of the hostages who are still being held. But at some point, it may come down to either continuing the Rafah operation or accepting at least a temporary truce in exchange for a hostage release. Now, a new poll from the Israel Democracy Institute today finds that 62% of the Israeli public believes that a deal to release the hostages should be the top priority for Israel, compared to just 31.5% who say military action in Rafah should be the top priority. However, this is a debate in the government and across Israeli society. Here are two voices from that.
Just like all the people in Israel, we want the hostages home, but not at a price that Israel's not going to be victorious. We have to go in and we have to defeat these people. It's hard for everybody. We all have family and relatives that are fighting, but we have to finish this war. We want the hostages home, but at the same time, we have to get rid of Hamas.
If there's a deal that is there to be done, that would be great. And if we get the hostages back, that would be fantastic. But it can't be that we go ahead, we sit at a negotiating table, and then all of a sudden they come back and say, I agree to a deal, I just changed like 12 of the terms. But that's okay, right? I mean, that's just not how deals are done.
Well, for more, let's go to our correspondent Blair Sladine, who is out in Tel Aviv at the Hostage Square, and we see gatherings still there, protests, a very heated one last evening, Blair, which each day, the feeling among the hostage families, this is the time to make a hostage deal before it becomes too late, basically.
Yes, exactly. What's behind me is actually a prayer, singing also today, gathering for the families of hostages, and praying, of course, for the return of these hostages. And the hostage families, especially those who belong to the Hostage Families Forum, said today in an announcement in front of the Hostage Square where we are right now, which is actually very close to the IDF headquarters, that if ending the war or if bringing back our loved ones means ending the war, then the government should take that decision. They are saying that while we know that there is a consensus actually inside the war cabinet that doesn't agree to end the war before the full elimination of Hamas, it doesn't say, of course, which of the aims of this war is more important here. Of course, maybe they value more the return of the hostages. The question is, at what cost is that possible or not? And also, I should report that in the past hour, after 24 hours of relying on sources maybe to know what the American stance on Hamas's latest response. Yesterday, John Kirby, right now, an hour ago, said in a press conference that the Americans see that after analyzing the response from Hamas, that both sides can actually reach an agreement. There is a possibility to bridge on the gaps that are between the two parties.
All right, well, if that does happen, it would certainly be good news for the hostage families. But of course, as we've seen, a lot of debate. There'll be debate about that, including within, of course, the Israeli government itself. Blair Sladine at Hostage Square, thank you for that. And for more, we're joined now by Itai Raviv, whose cousin, Karen Munder, was released with her 9-year-old son, Ohad, and her mother, Ruti, in the first hostage deal. But Itai's uncle, Avraham Munder, 78 years old, one of the oldest hostages, is still being held in Gaza. And we should note one of his other cousins, Ro'i, was killed. Ro'i Munder was killed in the attack on Kibbutz Nir Oz. Itai joins us from Herzliya. And Itai, just first of all, just your reactions to these developments, the up and downs of just the last couple of days. It looked like there might be very close to a hostage deal. Then it looked like it all blew up. And now this evening, even with what's going on in Gaza, perhaps there's a possibility. Just the reactions, how you feel, and you and your family.
Honestly, it's terrible. It didn't just happen now. It's been happening for the past 6 months. And now it's just more and more amplified by the media, and everything feels more real. But the same thing has been happening since the last deal ended, actually. And yeah, we still wait for Avram. He's already 79. He had his 79th birthday in captivity. It's been 7 months today, actually, and it's awful. I can't believe it's been so long, and I feel like a deal should have happened a long time ago.
Right.
He's an old person. He uses a cane to walk, as you can see in the picture in front of you. He barely sees. He has heart problems. He needs to take medications daily. Now I know it's been so long, I'm not even sure if he's alive or not. We know he was alive through to day 56 or 57 of the war, when the last hostages in the first and only deal were released, because they were with him in the tunnels in captivity.
Right. Now, Itai, I don't know if you've heard what I said earlier. Poll today showing the Israeli public is with certainly the hostage family, saying this is the priority, getting them home. Others that are seeing the priority on continuing the operation in Rafah. There are those who say, well, the only way there really will be a deal is to press on even further until Hamas is really ready to capitulate. I mean, what's your response? What's your dialogue with those voices in Israel, some of them of whom are in the government?
Yeah, so I understand all of these voices. Some of them are my friends. Honestly, I think there has been no operation for the past 3 months, 4 months. So I don't understand why suddenly now there should be. I think a deal could have happened a long time ago. And then you can do with Hamas whatever you want. But the fact is that every day that passes, there are less hostages to save. We've seen so many hostages dying in captivity, whether it's because of their medical condition, whether it's because Hamas decided to murder them. The fact is they don't have any time left. We need to get them out. You hear it on the testimonies of the people that came out of there. You understand it. And it's crazy to always hear they talk about 22 people, 33. It's human beings who are right now suffering in captivity. They don't have time. They don't have it. The women who are over there, they don't have time to we need to wait now. We need to first finish the job. This government and many members of it have had the opportunity to finish the job and to eradicate Hamas for the past 20 years. My uncle Abraham, he has been living for the past 20 years in Oz with bombings, and the government, and especially the head of this government, has not done anything to stop Hamas. He has transferred money to them. And now all of a sudden, now he wants to eradicate Hamas. Of course, Hamas needs to be demolished. They are a threat to Israel and to all Israelis, and they are only responsible for what happened to my family and what happened to all Israelis. But I think that like we had 20 years to deal with Hamas and we didn't do anything, so we can wait with eradicating Hamas. And now there are people that we can save now. They are alive, and we can save them today, tomorrow, when we must do it. This is our moral obligation to save them, to get them out of there alive and not in coffins. There are already more than 30 people that we know that we're going to get in coffins out of there. We cannot let the fate of the rest 100 people be the same. We cannot let it happen.
Right. All right. Itai Raviv, of course, we most of all wish the return. You do see the safe return of your uncle Avraham and the continued recovery of those other family members that were released, and of course still our condolences for those, for Roe, who were killed in the attack. Thank you for joining us on I-24 News. Gentlemen, just briefly, do you think there's a possibility, even in the coming days, as maybe John Kirby said at the White House, for a hostage deal?
Well, there's always a possibility, although...
Realistic possibility.
Realistic, I would say that I suspect, and I hope I am wrong, that Hamas is delaying, and Hamas was doing all its shenanigans because maybe they do not have 33 live hostages. And if this is the case, I think then they should be punished for it, and certainly the principles of the deal should be a little bit different.
I think that, to be very simple, Hamas now is not willing for creating or coming to such agreement on releasing the hostages. Why? Because Hamas is looking to survive, and survival for Hamas is to continue to be an entity in Gaza. And in Hamas' eyes, the situation of Israel, the delegitimation all over the world. Secondly, the tension between Israel and the United States, convincing them to continue in this issue or in this direction, with the fact that, just was mentioned by Danny, about the number of the hostages. Hamas, the time is not bringing Hamas to any kind to be like a mine. It's serving their purpose. And in my opinion, it will be difficult, but there is one but. United States cannot allow itself the third time of a failure in such agreement. And this can be the only case to bring Hamas in other ways to change its mind. The coming 2-3 days will be very critical.
We'll have to see what happens. Gentlemen, thank you. Now, on college campuses across the U.S. and Europe as well, scenes of confrontation as police square off against pro-Palestinian, anti-Israel demonstrators. On the streets of New York City, NYPD officers last night headed off a protest march from Columbia University, heading to the Metropolitan Museum of Art, aiming to disrupt the annual Met Fashion Gala, police arresting dozens of activists. Police also moved in to clear out a protest encampment on the campus of the University of Chicago. Similar scenes playing out in the Netherlands, on the campus of the University of Amsterdam, in Belgium at the University of Ghent, and on the grounds of Berlin's Freie University, among others. Now, U.S. President Joe Biden addressed the campus protest in a speech today at a Holocaust Remembrance event on Capitol Hill.
I understand people have strong beliefs and deep convictions about the world. In America, we respect and protect the fundamental right to free speech, to debate and disagree, to protest peacefully, and make our voices heard. I understand that's America, but there is no place on any campus in America, any place in America, for anti-Semitism or hate speech or threats of violence of any kind, whether against Jews or anyone else. Violent attacks, destroying property, is not peaceful protest. It's against the law. And we are not a lawless country. We're a civil society. We uphold the rule of law. And no one should have to hide or be brave just to be themselves. To the Jewish community, I want you to know, I see your fear, your hurt, and your pain. Let me reassure you, as your president, you're not alone. You belong. You always have and you always will.
Danny, strong words from President Biden. Makes me wonder if you saw that Axios poll published earlier today that showed not only a significant majority of Americans opposed to these protests on campuses, a significant majority of college students. In fact, in a list of the top 8 concerns of college students, only 12% listed the Middle East as being their top concern, or among their top concerns.
Yeah, actually, the true picture was confused because of, I would say, the violence and the visibility that the protesters received. But if you look at all the protesters throughout the United States, no more than a few thousands. The vast majority of Americans, including American students, are supporting Israel. We see it in consecutive and consistently in different polls. I always wondered, and now I think maybe the tide is changing, how long will it take to the middle America, to the silent majority, to counter this anarchist? I cannot say anything else, but it is anarchism. And when they cover, this anarchists, cover American icons with kafirs or with Palestinian flags, and when they burn American flags, not just Israelis.
I'm just going to know, we're seeing pictures of the protest march that was last evening in New York, when they were denied access to the Metropolitan Museum of Art. Some of them defaced the World War I memorial there in the city, for example.
Which again shows that, they have nothing to do with Gaza or with the Palestinians. By the way, if they were such human rights activists, why didn't they protest when Assad killed hundreds of thousands of his people, or in the Ukraine or anywhere else?
All good questions. Ambassador Danny Ayalon, Brigadier General Eitan Dango, thank you for joining us again on our broadcast. Now, anti-Israel protests are also set to take place this week in Malmo, Sweden, which is hosting, of course, the Eurovision Song Contest. And the Israeli contestant Eden Golan. Now, the competition semifinals start tonight, and Golan is set to take the stage on Thursday to perform Israel's song entry, Hurricane. You'll recall it had to be changed from the original title, which was October Rain, after Eurovision organizers deemed that too much of a direct political reference to the October 7th massacre. Now, Golan, the target of terror death threats, is staying and will perform in Malmo under very heavy security. So heavy that Ronen Bar, the head of Israel's Shin Bet security agency, reportedly made the trip to Sweden last week to oversee the arrangements. Here's Golan speaking about her Eurovision experience.
Hours and hours and powers, life is no.
I'm coming here to show my voice, to share my love, my gift from God, and to hopefully make people feel something and leave a mark in their souls, and to unite by music. I have the best security team to take care of me and the entire delegation, and it's up to the people what to do. They have the right to speak their voice, but I'm focusing on my part, which is giving the best performance and on the good vibes, the good people. So yeah, I feel honored to have the opportunity to be the voice of my country and stand in front of millions of people.
This hurricane. And correspondent Christopher Barrelin from our French channel usually is at Malmo, and he filed this report.
The Malmo Arena, it's behind me. That's the first semi-final is about to start. In 2 hours, the first contestants of this Eurovision are going to perform. And there is indeed a lot of safety, a lot of policemen around this event, because because the safety authorities, the security authorities of Sweden are afraid of terrorist attack. There was threat regarding this Eurovision. There was threat all the time, because Sweden is a country that has raised his security alerts, his security level regarding terrorism. And tonight, with the Eurovision starting, there are even more threats, because people are mad that Israel is contesting in that country. Israel is not going to perform tonight. Israel is going to perform in 2 days for the second semi-final. But tonight on stage there will be Tali. She's representing Luxembourg, but she's Israeli too. And I could speak with her a few moments ago. This is what she told me.
Music has the power to unite people, and I've always thought that, especially from someone that has moved around. I've been in Jewish schools, I've been in non-Jewish schools, I've been in international school, like I went to a liberal arts college. I've been to so many different environments, and I really, really think that music has the power to unite human beings. United by music, like it's literally written in bold here. And so I really hope that people are making it political. We can't lie here, but I really hope that people focus on, the unification of, humanity, and how there's so much hatred in the world. And let's not do that. Let's lead with kindness,
Well, good luck to her, and especially to our aide in Golan. And staying focused on the entertainment sector for the moment. Of course, show business in the United States has no shortage of prominent Jewish figures, some of whom have spoken out in support of Israel and against the surge of anti-Semitism, and unfortunately many more who have not. But one of those who has is Scooter Braun, one of the most influential executives in the music business, who has now brought a heart-shattering exhibit to New York City to memorialize the victims of the Nova Music Festival massacre. He spoke about what motivated him to take this step with our Natasha Kirchik in this exclusive interview.
Oh my God. What just happened? Oh my God!
May of 2017. An Islamic terrorist detonates a suicide bomb at the Manchester Arena in England right after a concert by American pop star Ariana Grande. 22 people are killed and over 1,000 people are injured. Just 2 weeks later, Ariana and her manager Scooter Braun produce One Love Manchester, a massive concert benefit in memory of the victims. The biggest artists in the world join in, and the world responds with an outpour of love and support. And then, 6 years later, in October of 2023, Hamas terrorists who share the same ideology brutally attack the Nova Music Festival in southern Israel, killing hundreds. And there's silence from the international community. Some even say it's justified. Now, music mogul Scooter Braun is on a mission to change that. He's bringing the Nova exhibit to New York City, a recreation of what happened at the music festival on October 7th.
You were managing Ariana Grande during the Manchester Arena bombing, so you must have been deeply impacted by what happened at Nova.
I was shocked to see the world react in the way that they did. When Manchester happened, they rallied. When Las Vegas happened, they rallied. This is the largest massacre in music history at a live event, and no one was talking about it. They were making it a political issue, and I don't think an attack on music festivals and innocent music lovers is about politics or about borders.
Bullet-ridden porta potties, burned cars, piles of personal belongings left behind in the chaos. These are just some of the shocking images at the Nova exhibit, which was originally created as a sort of homage to the victims in Tel Aviv. Now anybody can buy a ticket for just $1 to see this in New York.
When I came to Israel and I met the survivors, when I saw they were just kids who love music, when they took me to the exhibit, I knew that the world needed to see this, that they could see themselves. They could see that this could have been Coachella, this could have been Lollapalooza, this could have been Stagecoach. I think by seeing yourself in this venue, you start to realize this is about humanity.
אני דור, הייתי במסיבת נובה, הייתה לי עמדה של מסאז'ים, הכל היה מדהים עד שהגיע שעה 6 בבוקר. אנחנו רואים שובלים של טילים עולים לאוויר, באותו רגע עוצרים את המוזיקה, צועקים, המסיבה נגמרה, כולם נכנסים לפאניקה, מתחילים להתפנות, לא יודעים מה לעשות, שוכבים על הרצפה, רצים לכל מקום, נהיה כאוס רציני במתחם. התחלנו לשמוע יריות מרחוק, מסתכל על הג'יפ, אנחנו נכנסים לתוך סרט.
מה יש?
This is just one of thousands of testimonies from Nova, a weekend-long trance music festival where over 3,000 people were partying on October 7. Just before 7 a.m., hundreds of Hamas terrorists infiltrated the festival, transforming it into a hunting ground.
אנשים תופסים את הראש, מה עושים? התחיל להתקרב הירי 400 מטר, 300 מטר. מתחילים לרוץ לכיוון החניות, עולים על הג'יפ, מתחילים לנסוע בין אנשים, בין הקנטות עם הג'יפ. איכשהו מצליח לצאת לחניה האחורית, אני רואה חוליה של איזה 30-40 מחבלים עם נשקים מתחילים להיכנס לתוך המתחם ולירות פשוט, ואני רואה אנשים רצים לכיוונים מהיציאות ופשוט נופלים כמו ברווזים.
Over 360 young people were murdered. Dozens were kidnapped, thousands were injured, and many were raped. Those who survived are still dealing with the aftermath of the trauma and may never truly recover.
אנשים לא יחזרו להיות מי שהם, גם אם החברים שיחזרו מעבר לגבול שלקחו אותם, לא יחזרו להיות אותו דבר. מלא גופות, מלא אנשים פצועים שלא יכולנו לעשות בשבילם כלום.
In December of 2023, less than 3 months after, Scooter Braun made his way to Israel to hear some of their stories firsthand. Usually you hear about Scooter on the news when it comes to Hollywood. He's managed and discovered some of the biggest music stars on the planet, from Justin Bieber to Demi Lovato and J Balvin. And he runs Hybe America, one of the biggest entertainment companies in the world. But after seeing and hearing about what happened in Israel, he felt a responsibility to use his voice.
As a music mogul who has been in the industry for so many years, why do you think that we haven't heard more condemnation from the music industry about the Nova Party massacre?
I think it's not necessarily that people are scared to support Israel. I think it's more scared to be supportive of anything that feels divisive. I think people, it's easier to stay silent and not have thousands of people yelling at you and telling you don't know what you're talking about. The amount of misinformation, the amount of hatred, the amount of noise to distract people from what took place was so incredibly overwhelming. That's why we're here. That's why I'm standing here in this exhibit in New York City, hoping to bring it to LA next and other places and for people to see it.
There are people hiding everywhere. Everywhere. Under cars, in the bathroom cells, in the fridges of the bar. There were 30 people hiding in the bathroom cells. These bathroom cells are the original ones. They have bullets, signs in them. We marked them in order for all of the people to see. There were 30 people who were hiding there. Only 3 came out, 2 girls and a boy. Again, out of luck.
You've gotten a lot of love, but you've also gotten a lot of hate for speaking out in support of Israel and the Nova victims and survivors.
I think coming to Israel gave me a tremendous amount of strength. The people I met, every single one of them talked about peace. I mean, I met people who were shot through the leg, who almost died, who lost friends. And instead of talking about hatred, they talked about wanting peace on the other side. This is controversial for some, but I don't care. You should have room in your heart to have compassion for all innocent people. You know, you should have room in your heart that you can call out for the hostages, but also want an innocent child in Gaza to be protected. I don't care what anyone says, all children are innocent.
What is your response to people who might come out and protest against this exhibit and call it political?
Well, it's a couple responses. One, don't talk to me about your want for peace or your want for anyone to have freedom unless you also acknowledge all people. And two, you can make all the noise you want. It's not going to stop us from telling this story.
Good to see someone in his position taking a stand like that.